It's time for my monthly palette ranking. Now I am combining July and August. I only tried 4 palettes in July. I had to think about that for a second, and 3 of them were from the same brand. They were the Clionadh palettes, so I thought it would just be better to wait and have more palettes to rank that were not majority of the same brand. So instead I have 15 palettes to rank between the 2 months, and that's the good news. The bad news is I forgot to save the swatches of the palettes, so if you would like to see swatches of the palette, you will have to check out my dedicated videos on those palettes. Now there are 4 palettes I did not do a dedicated video on, however I will be showing you swatches and an eye look with those 4 palettes. So let's get right into it, and I want to preface this with none of these eyeshadow palettes are bad, none of these are horrible, atrocious quality. All of these perform really great. It really comes down to preference and color story and what I feel like stands out to me and or I see myself reaching for the most. So in the last place, actually the bottom 4 are the newest Cindy Grace palettes, and these were sent to me in PR, and these launched for their Christmas in July sale, which they do every year, and they always launch something new, usually an eyeshadow palette. And these palettes are actually only $36, and I believe you can get some sort of percentage off. There's definitely a bunch of coupons flying around, so these are super affordable, and these are all 9-pan palettes. So I'm just gonna start off with really mostly color story wise. So in last place would be the Southern Spring palette. Really cute packaging, and again I'm going to be showing you swatches and a look. And I just think something about this color story, while I love it because it gives me some reds but also olives, it's that there is no like brown deepening up shade or something like that. There's only that right in the center, the reddish brown shade. So I do like this color story, but it doesn't quite like knock it out of the park for me. Also across all 4 of these palettes, they do seem to have kind of 3 different shimmer formulas. There's one slightly amplified shimmer formula, which is Sweet Magnolia, and then there's also a satin, and then the third finish is kind of between a satin and the slightly amped up formula. The mattes perform beautifully. Cindy Grace is definitely known for having a really great matte formula that is just extremely consistent across all of their palettes. So then in 14th place is their Northern Winter palette. I really like this color story. There's something more unique about this one because of the kind of grays and reds together and the brown. I think this is a really nicely balanced color story. That being said, overall, there's really 2 main reasons why these are ranking so low, and that is because none of these color stories for me are just really like knocking it out of the park, just like a personal preference. I think there's some brands that just for me do color stories like absolutely amazing for my preference and what I like, and then there's some brands that just don't match my aesthetic or kind of what I look for, what really interests me. This color story is definitely more interesting. I am really glad that there is a black eyeshadow in here to really just smoke this out. I really like the look that I came up with this palette. And then in 13th place is the Western Summer palette, and this has greens and yellows in it and blues, and I love this kind of color story. I would say this one is the most colorful out of all of the palettes, and I do really love the tones in here. And the second main reason why these are ranking lower is because of the shimmer formula. I don't need shifty, sparkly shades all the time, but it is something I lean towards a little bit, especially more sheer kind of shades, and all of these are pretty opaque, and especially these kinds of shades like this one right here is just not really something I see myself using a lot. I did use one shade, I forget which palette it was like a cream satin, and it actually creased on me and started disintegrating over the course of the day. I wore it when I was going to the office, so it's like an easy 12-hour day, and I was actually pretty surprised on how much it started to wear off because I was really not expecting that. And I think that's partially why I do like something a little bit extra shimmery, because if it does wear off, it still has like a lot of sparkle to stay on, while if I use a more satin shadow, then it just becomes even more and more satin by the end of the day because of my hooded oily lid. So I think that is why I just tend to gravitate towards other formulas, especially sheer formulas, because it's much less obvious when a sheer shadow creases on you than a more opaque and possibly darker shimmer shadow. So that's really the 2 main reasons, but I do really love the color story of this one. And then the last one is Eastern Fall, which, you know, I am in the Eastern Hemisphere, so maybe I'm a little biased, but this is a beautiful warm tone color story, and I love this burnt orangey reddish shade in here. This is definitely something I see myself gravitating towards a lot. And this one has a satin cream shadow and then a more sparkly, beautiful bronzy shade, and then this super dark kind of in between metallic shade, which again, this is not really something I see myself reaching for too much. Like I wish there was maybe these 2 switched and maybe this one was just like another pop of orange or something like that. So it's really just such a huge personal preference, but I love the mattes so much. They're really great quality mattes, super reliable. I have been reaching for the mattes in this palette over the last couple of weeks, just here and there when I sit down to do my makeup in the morning before work. So in 11th place are actually 2 palettes, and I'm just pairing these together because one of them is an all shimmer palette. It has 6 pans in it, and these launch together, so I kind of feel like they belong together. And that is the Melted Mattes palette from Bella Beaute Bar. And then the, let's see if I can hold them both up at the same time, and the Molten Chromes palette. And predominantly the reason that they are ranking lower is I don't really use brighter colors like this. I don't see myself gravitating towards these a lot. I think this is nice to have if you like to do a lot of BYOPs and you like to have a larger assortment of different tones and colors, and especially if you really like your oranges and yellows and pinks. As for the Molten Chrome palette, I do really like the assortment of shades in here. However, there's a couple of squishy shades in here that I will have to use the tissue method to just make them a bit more usable for me and my oily hooded lids. Let me tell you, it's really hard to live, love, laugh with these oily lids because they ruin everything for me. But I digress. I really love these two shades, especially because they are very smooth, and I also love the color of them, especially Dissolve. Like, this yellow is stunning. So in 10th place is the Oceano palette from Clionadh Cosmetics. This is a new addition to their original launch of the Archeo and Paleo palettes, which they have redone and remastered essentially, and they have added the Oceano palette, and I do have a dedicated video on all 3 of these palettes with detail swatches and swatch comparisons. And there's just something about this color story that doesn't fully speak to me. Like, I feel like there's some things that I would have switched out. It doesn't feel fully complete for me as much as I love the shimmers in here. I mean, these two almost iridescent shades are just absolutely stunning. Love the shimmers in here for sure. This is also the comeback of Clionadh matte, so they haven't had them for a few years. They were working on perfecting them, so this is my first time trying the Clionadh mattes, and I think this partially kind of adds on to just the color story not being for me. Is the mattes are very, very powdery. They're very pigmented. They do blend really nicely, but I'm just not the biggest fan of super, super powdery mattes. So in 9th place is the Ensley Rain Flourish palette. This is the bright, colorful sister to their other grungy palette, which is higher in this ranking, and purely this is the more colorful story. And I feel like there's one deepening up shade. Love the shimmers in here, super, super beautiful, but I just do prefer some of the other color stories. But if I just like could take out these shimmers, I mean, Buttercup Bliss, Garden Glow, Nectar is absolutely stunning. Again, I have a dedicated video on this one with comparisons. This one was like impossible to dupe. Love the shimmers in here. It's really just a general color story, doesn't really speak to me. And in 8th place is the newest Blood Money collab, and it is with Donnie Darkowitz, and it's called Little Miss She Never Misses. I just posted a video with this one. I did do a couple of comparison swatches to the multi-chromes in here. I love Blood Money mattes. I love the way that they are in a gradient. I do predominantly see myself reaching for the mattes in here, just unmatched formula, guaranteed an amazing blend. That being said, most of the shimmers are a little bit on the squishy side, and they are a little bit darker. And also these two shimmers are just so similar to each other. I much prefer these two shades because they're a little bit drier. So I think predominantly I will be reaching for this for the matte. So that's why this one is ranking a little bit lower, but also above some of the other palettes that we just talked about. I miscounted the pads because I forgot I was pairing the melted mattes with the molten chromes. So whatever this next place is, I believe it would be 6th place. But this palette is the Paleo palette from Clionadh Cosmetics. I love the grungy tones in here. I do prefer this color story to the Oceano palette. This one is very fall. I love the mattes in here. The assortment of the mattes is just so beautiful. And then these 3 shimmer shades are just absolutely stunning. I think maybe the top row shimmers are a little bit redundant. I would have loved to see one of them maybe switched out to like another mid-tone neutral or something like that. But overall, really like this color story and definitely see myself reaching for it just specifically for this color story. And in 5th place is the Moonwish palette from Odin's Eye. Love this color story. It's giving me space vibes, and I love that. I love the different mattes in here. I love the different matte shades, and I always will love me a purple matte eyeshadow, especially this depth. I think this is a really well curated color story that just, I open it up and I'm just like, yep, this is beautiful. I definitely want to use this one. And in 4th place is the Coastal palette from Simply Posh Cosmetics. I mean, I love this color story. I love the mattes. The mattes are so beautiful. They pretty much blend themselves, and the shimmers are also stunning, especially this one right here. I did mention in my video. This one is such a standout shade. Also love Serene. These are just ultra sparkly. Some of them are a little bit more prone to hard pan, but I really don't mind. These pick up and put down with a brush really great, so it doesn't really bother me. Love the mattes, love the color story. Definitely leaning more into the fall kind of color story, and I'm definitely here for that because fall is literally here basically. And then speaking of fall, in 3rd place is the Archeo palette from Clionadh. I just love the tones in here. I would say it's for sure more of a fall color story, a little bit more on the grungy side, especially with these 2 shades. Overall, I think it's really nicely balanced, and I also really love that the mattes are all at the top and the shimmers at the bottom. Shimmers are of course 10 out of 10 Clionadh shimmers. This one is for sure my favorite palette out of all the 3 that have launched. And in 2nd place is the Flutter palette from Ensley Rain. Love this color story. I mean, it's just everything in here. I love the pops of the peach and the bright green. Well, it's kind of more like a brighter pastel green. The mustardy green, the grayish green, the plum, and the black, and the shimmers in here are so spectacular, really beautiful. Golden Hour especially, could not dupe this one. It's so shifty and really, really unique, and I think that these shimmers pair so nicely with these mattes. There's so many looks I could create with this palette, and also because of that, when I open it up, I just want to use it. I just want to create more and more looks with it, and that's really what matters in this palette ranking, is when I open the palette, does it inspire me? Do I want to immediately use it again? Am I excited to use it again? And the first palette definitely does this. I mean, every time I open this palette up, sometimes I open it up just to look at it because it is so beautiful, and that is the Glaminatrix Cosmetics Barely Basic palette. It's definitely not basic. We have some iridescent shifty shades at the top, some more opaque metallics in the center, and then mattes that are categorized with different tones, and I love that. This is just so easy to use, whether you want to use them by column or if you want to dip in between. There's just endless options with this palette. I think my only criticism in my video was that these two shades are a little bit too similar, and these shimmers are so beautiful, very, very sparkly, but also very, very smooth. And I think this palette is just a 10 out of 10. Make sure you check out my video on this. I did do swatch comparisons and you name it. This is such an everyday palette. If I was to make an everyday palette, it would be pretty close to this. It's like they're reading my mind over there in Australia. So those are all the palettes I tried between July and August. Let me know in the comments below if you were surprised by any of these rankings, but also what is your favorite palette of August. Doesn't have to be a new launch at all, just whatever you have been really gravitating towards. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time.